And teeth are incredibly informative for a number of reasons. First off, the teeth themselves, the enamel and so forth, are the hardest tissue in the human and other animals' bodies. So they're more likely to survive the fossil record and the archaeological record to be studied in the first place.
For 40 years, scientists tried and failed to unlock the DNA of ancient Egyptians. Heat, humidity, and chemicals meant to preserve bodies seemed to erase their secrets forever. But now, everything has changed. Deep inside the teeth of a man who lived nearly 5,000 years ago, a complete genome survived. He wasn't a pharaoh or a king, just a potter. But his DNA tells a story that rewrites the origins of one of history's greatest civilizations. And that's not even the surprising part. The DNA reveals links across continents, showing how trade, migration, and everyday life connected people in ways historians never imagined. Where did these people really come from? How did their lives shape the Egypt we know? Today, we unravel the story of NUE-001, a skilled potter whose ordinary life opens a window into extraordinary human history, reshaping how we see ancient Egypt forever. Why extracting ancient Egyptian DNA was nearly impossible. You'd think uncovering the DNA of an ancient Egyptian would be simple, but in Egypt, nothing is ever that simple. The environment is relentless. Sun, sand, and desert heat don't just dry bodies. They chemically destroy DNA. The molecules inside break down faster than anyone expected. Even worse, the mummification process, which Egyptians perfected over centuries, works against DNA survival. Natron salts, used to dry the body, remove water that DNA needs to stay intact. Resins and oils meant to preserve the corpse chemically modified the DNA, making it nearly unreadable. The very techniques designed to make bodies last forever were ironically erasing the genetic traces scientists wanted most. And then comes contamination. Over thousands of years, mummies were touched by priests, tomb robbers, archaeologists, and later museum staff. Every single touch adds tiny fragments of modern DNA. Modern DNA is louder. It overwhelms the faint signals from the ancient genome. Even the tiniest contamination can make a sample useless. Scientists tried anyway. In the 19th century, early attempts produced nothing but fragments, tiny pieces that couldn't answer the big questions about Egypt's earliest dynasties. Svante Pääbo, a pioneer in ancient DNA, attempted it in 1985.
Practical implications and to find out about the past, we sort of make excavations in the human genome.
His work looked promising at first, but later tests revealed contamination. Other studies managed mitochondrial DNA or small snippets of nuclear DNA, but it wasn't enough to reconstruct a full picture. For decades, the Pyramid Age remained locked in genetic darkness. Progress came slowly. The first real breakthrough appeared in 2017 with mummies from Abusir el-Melek, dating roughly 1,500 to 2,000 years later than the Old Kingdom. For the first time, scientists retrieved reliable DNA. They discovered that people in that era had strong connections with Near Eastern and Levantine populations, with surprisingly little sub-Saharan ancestry. It was groundbreaking, but it left the era of pyramid builders a mystery. Who were these earliest Egyptians? Where did they come from? How did their lives shape the world we know today? The foundational period remained out of reach. So, what finally changed it? Why was DNA from nearly 5,000 years ago finally recoverable? Three factors came together: technology, technique, and luck. First, the technology. Ancient DNA methods have advanced tremendously. Labs now use shotgun sequencing, which can read fragmented DNA and rebuild whole genomes piece by piece. Bioinformatics tools separate authentic ancient DNA from contamination, allowing scientists to reconstruct genomes that were once considered impossible. Second, technique. Scientists learned how to avoid contamination. Every step, from extraction to sequencing, is controlled with extreme precision. Modern DNA is removed before analysis. Even the tiniest mistake can ruin an entire sample. So labs now operate like clean rooms in space missions. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the sample itself. Most mummies, even those that look perfectly preserved, have DNA that is too degraded to study. But one man's tooth survived in remarkable condition. Deep inside, shielded from heat, chemicals, and centuries of handling, the DNA remained intact. That tooth became a literal time capsule. Inside, every gene, every chromosome waited quietly for scientists to discover it. One ordinary tooth carries the full genetic story of a man who lived 5,000 years ago. Not a king, not a pharaoh, just a potter. But through him, scientists gained a glimpse into the lives of all Egyptians from his era. His DNA wasn't just a personal story. It was a window into the entire civilization. Every failed attempt before taught scientists something critical. They learned exactly how mummification destroys DNA, how to avoid contamination, and which samples might still hold secrets. Each failure wasn't wasted. It was a step closer to success. And when all the lessons came together, the right tooth, preserved perfectly against all odds, finally revealed what had been hidden for millennia. But the story doesn't stop at survival. The DNA revealed something historians didn't expect. Ancient Egyptians were connected. Trade, migration, and everyday life linked them across continents. Life in Egypt wasn't isolated. The potter's ancestors had traveled, interacted, and mixed with people far beyond the Nile Valley. This tiny genome was rewriting what we thought we knew about human connections in ancient times. The potter's ordinary life is extraordinary for history. This one man's genetic code allows scientists to explore questions that had no answers for thousands of years. Who else survived? What other genetic stories are waiting in tombs, in teeth, in mummies? The past isn't lost. It's waiting for someone to uncover it. Every element, the harsh climate, chemical mummification, contamination, and decades of failed studies make this success unbelievable. That one tooth wasn't just a lucky break. It's a symbol of perseverance, innovation, and the thrill of discovery. It shows that even the most impossible problems can yield results if you combine technology, careful technique, and a little bit of fortune. And the questions it raises are endless. What else will scientists uncover about the lives of ordinary Egyptians? How will these discoveries change what we know about civilization, migration, and human history? The answers are waiting, buried in the sands of time, inside teeth, bones, and tombs, ready to rewrite history again. The long-awaited breakthrough. Deep in Middle Egypt, near the village of Beni Hassan, lies a necropolis called Nuweirat, or Nuarat. Back in 1902, British archaeologist John Garstang uncovered something unusual there. A body placed not in a traditional tomb, but inside a large, sealed ceramic pot, tucked carefully into a rock-cut chamber. This wasn't a mummy wrapped in linen or adorned with treasures. It was an ordinary man. Scientists later called him NUE-001. Ordinary, yes, but his story would become extraordinary. The burial, strange as it seemed, turned out to be perfect for preserving DNA. The pot created a stable microenvironment, shielding the remains from Egypt's intense heat and humidity. Unlike most ancient DNA, which disintegrates quickly under such conditions, NUE-001's genetic material survived, quietly waiting for the right moment over 4,500 years later to be uncovered. Radiocarbon dating placed NUE-001's life between 2,855 and 2,570 years BCE. That means he lived during the transition from the early dynastic period to the early Old Kingdom, the era when the Third and Fourth dynasties were establishing Egypt as a unified state. While grand structures like Djoser's Step Pyramid were rising, and plans for the Great Pyramid of Giza were underway, NUE-001 went about his life in ways we can barely imagine. Fast forward to 2025. A team of scientists, led by Adeline Morez Jacobs of Liverpool, John Moores University, and the Francis Crick Institute, together with bioarchaeologist Joel D. Irish, decided it was time to finally unlock his DNA. The team focused on the roots of his teeth. Teeth act as tiny time capsules. While bones degrade quickly in Egypt's heat, the roots of teeth can protect DNA for thousands of years. Using whole genome sequencing, the scientists reconstructed NUE-001's entire genetic code for the first time from ancient Egypt. Their work achieved about 2.02 times coverage.
Extract, purify the DNA that we then treat in various ways so we can feed it into DNA sequence.
Producing a complete genome and giving researchers a detailed picture of an individual from a pivotal moment in Egyptian history. NUE-001's mitochondrial DNA, inherited from his mother, was a haplogroup, a lineage still found today in North Africa and West Asia. His Y chromosome, inherited from his father, is also common in North Africa, and there were no long runs of homozygosity, meaning his parents weren't closely related. Even small details like this help scientists understand population patterns, family connections, and social structure in ancient Egypt. NUE-001 wasn't a royal. He didn't tell troops what to do or build pyramids, but his DNA is changing the course of history. It depicts the genetic makeup of the people who founded Egypt's first great civilization, offering us a look at both their everyday lives and their amazing accomplishments. His genome even suggests links to places outside of Egypt, which is even more interesting. It shows that people from North Africa and the Near East are genetically related to him. This suggests that migration, trade, and intermarriage were already changing the area thousands of years ago. People were migrating, meeting, and mixing long before written records talked of trade routes or foreign relations. NUE-001 shows that ancient Egypt wasn't cut off from the rest of the world. It was part of a network of people interacting across continents. The chances of this finding happening were quite low. One normal tooth, kept in a ceramic pot, survived heat, chemical changes, and hundreds of years of being handled by people. 100 years later, scientists needed the necessary tools, expertise, and accuracy to pull out and sequence the DNA. If they had made a mistake, the oldest Egyptian genome could have been lost forever. This new discovery opens up a world of possibilities. By comparing NUE-001's genome to those of later populations, scientists may see how genes have changed over thousands of years. It shows how people moved around, how different groups of people mixed, and even how individuals lived their daily lives in a world when little written records were kept. People like NUE-001 become ambassadors from the past, delivering stories that paintings, tombs, or hieroglyphs could never fully explain. The narrative of NUE-001 shows us that history isn't simply about pharaohs and big buildings. Sometimes, the most interesting revelations come from those who didn't seem important at the time. His life and DNA shed light on the lifestyles, movements, and connections of early Egyptians, while also challenging preconceived notions about their identities. The discovery makes things much more unclear. Could other ancient Egyptians with strange burial methods have genomes that are just as well preserved? What else might scientists find as sequencing technology gets better? NUE-001 may have been the first full genome, but he probably won't be the last. Every new finding changes how we think about human history and reveals that even regular people leave behind amazing legacies. NUE-001 wasn't well known at the time, but he is now. He was buried in a simple pot in the sands of Egypt, and he became a key to uncovering the mysteries of one of the greatest civilizations in history. His genome communicates over thousands of years, showing that the past is never really quiet. It waits, sometimes in a tooth, to tell the narrative of all of us. What the DNA actually revealed. When scientists finally decoded NUE-001's genome, they uncovered a story that stretched across continents and millennia. This wasn't just the DNA of a single man. It was a record of people moving, trading, and connecting in ways historians had only guessed at. About 78% of his DNA came from ancient North African farmers, whose ancestors lived thousands of years earlier. These were people from the Middle Neolithic period in Morocco, specifically from a site called Skirat Rouazi, dating between 4780 and 4230 before the Common Era. Their own ancestry was already a mix: local hunter-gatherers, called Ibero-Maurusians, and farmers who had migrated from the Levant, the Eastern Mediterranean. In other words, the majority of NUE 001's ancestors were part of a long chain of movement and mixing that linked Africa and the Levant, shaping the population that would eventually settle along the Nile. The remaining 22% of his DNA traced back to the Eastern Fertile Crescent, roughly modern-day Iraq and Syria. These people lived during the Neolithic, 19,000 to 8,000 years ago, and their genes carried the marks of some of the world's first cities, irrigation systems, and early writing. It shows that early Egyptians weren't developing in isolation. People, ideas, and genes were traveling long distances, arriving in Egypt long before the pharaohs built their first monumental tombs. When researchers ran several models that looked at modest contributions from the Chalcolithic Levant, the overall proportions stayed pretty much the same. Using PCA and admixture grouping, more advanced charting put NUE 001 solidly among North African and West Asian populations, which was what his haplogroups had already revealed. Another interesting thing: this early Old Kingdom person did not have any sub-Saharan ancestry. This suggests that the earliest Egyptians in this area and time were mostly influenced by people from North Africa and West Asia. Later, Egypt would have a wider range of genes, but at the very beginning of dynastic society, its people were extremely different. These results show that Egypt's rise wasn't solely because of its location or new ideas in the area. People traveled from one area to another, carrying their knowledge, tools, and DNA with them. Archaeologists have long known that early Egyptian culture took ideas from the East, like pottery styles, building methods, and even early symbols that led to writing. DNA now proves that individuals traveled as well, not simply things or ideas. That link to West Asia, which was roughly 20 to 22%, helps explain how Egypt grew so swiftly. It wasn't just farming and taking care of the Nile. It was also the information, talents, and maybe even ways of life that those who moved from Mesopotamia brought with them. These early trades may have helped Egypt come together and start building huge buildings like pyramids. This theme of cooperation and connection comes from a mix of North African roots and ideas from other places. Egypt didn't come about in a vacuum. It was influenced by people moving, migrating, and mixing from diverse areas. That combination made the people who would become the first pharaoh's subjects, the builders of pyramids, and the early architects of Egyptian civilization. NUE 001's genome shows no long stretches of homozygosity, indicating no recent inbreeding. His forebears were part of a large, connected network of people, not just separate households. This implies that the early Egyptian populace possessed diversity, which may have been essential for creativity, cultural interaction, and stability as the kingdom grew. Historians couldn't identify connections in monuments or books alone, but every layer of his DNA does. Pottery, architectural ideas, and even early government were all moving along the same routes as DNA. People were moving about, meeting new people, and changing societies. We now have proof of human migration and cultural interaction at the very beginning of Egypt's history, thanks to the teeth of an ordinary man. The genome also calls into question established ideas. For decades, there was a controversy about whether Egypt's culture developed in isolation or was influenced by interactions with neighboring regions. NUE 001 reveals that it was both. North Africans from the area brought stability and farming knowledge, while West Asians brought talents, ideas, and genetic diversity that worked well with each other. They worked together to build one of the most formidable civilizations in history. The narrative of NUE 001 shows us that there is more to history than pyramids and tombs. It can be found in the simplest things, like a single tooth, It tells the story of thousands of people who traveled across continents and changed the culture, technology, and even the DNA of early Egyptians. His genome is a window into a world of trade, connection, and human migration that made all that came after it possible. When Egypt had its first pharaohs, the people they controlled were already a mix of different groups, ideas, and new things. NUE-001's DNA shows the unseen lines of lineage, which shows that civilizations were rarely alone in the past. People went, they got together, they talked about their thoughts. They made the world we still live in today by doing this. Bringing NUE-001 to life, the man behind the genome. NUE-001 wasn't a king. He didn't command armies or erect pyramids. Yet, in his bones, teeth, and DNA, he carries a story that connects the ordinary with the extraordinary, the story of early Egypt itself. First, let's talk about his body. Skeletal analysis shows he was an adult male, likely living into his 60s. That's impressive for anyone, but especially for someone living more than 4,500 years ago. His height ranged roughly 157 to 165.5 centimeters, about average for his time, but it's the marks on his bones that tell the real tale. These clues reveal patterns of life, stress, and survival, offering a glimpse into his daily experiences and the challenges he endured over decades of existence in an ancient world. His seat bones were unusually broad and robust, a sign of sitting on hard surfaces for hours, again and again. His arms bore strong muscle markings, shaped by repetitive back-and-forth motions. His right foot and spine showed heavy arthritis, likely from constant squatting or leaning over work surfaces. Every joint and groove in his bones whispered the rhythm of daily labor, allowing scientists to almost picture him at work, moving with practiced, repetitive motions throughout each demanding day. Joel Irish and his team of bioarchaeologists studied these patterns carefully.
And not only the expression of, for example, the size of the teeth, but also the morphology.
The movements, the wear, the posture, it all fits the profile of a potter. Pottery wheels arrived in Egypt around this time, likely brought from the Near East, and NUE-001's skeleton tells us he spent much of his life at one. Repetitive motions, squatting, balancing clay. His skeleton is like a fingerprint of his trade. But there's more. His burial is unusual. He wasn't just thrown into a simple grave. Instead, he was placed inside a large ceramic pot in a rock-cut tomb, suggesting he held a higher social status than a typical worker. Maybe he was exceptionally skilled. Perhaps his pottery was in demand, used in elite households, temples, or for special ceremonies. His hands shaped not just clay, but his social standing. And then comes the face behind the bones. Forensic artist Caroline Wilkinson used 3D skull scans and DNA-informed predictions to recreate what NUE-001 may have looked like.
But I also think that with the advances in DNA, the depiction of faces from human remains may become
Brown eyes, brown hair, skin pigmentation in the dark to black range typical of North African populations. Suddenly, the genome stops being abstract numbers and becomes a real person with a presence, a look, and a life. Here's where it gets even more fascinating. While he molded clay on the banks of the Nile, the first pyramids were rising on the horizon. Djoser's step pyramid had already begun, and the Great Pyramid's blueprint was in the making. His work was part of the same world, the same moment in history that built these enduring monuments. He was shaping daily life in the same period that monumental change was transforming Egypt, and his DNA tells another layer of the story. His genetic signature carries both North African roots and a touch of Mesopotamian ancestry. That mix wasn't just about family trees, it was about ideas, trade, and human connections. The skills, the tools, even the pottery techniques may have traveled along these same pathways. NUE-001 embodies how early Egyptians weren't isolated. They were part of a broader network of exchange and innovation. Think about it. A man shaping clay vessels, sweating over a wheel in the heat of Middle Egypt, while the Nile carried goods, stories, and people from distant lands. His genome shows the fingerprints of those connections, revealing that Egypt's rise wasn't just the work of pharaohs, but also of ordinary people like him, whose daily labor, skill, and resilience laid the foundation for a civilization that still captivates the world. Even the wear on his joints tells a story of persistence. Arthritis in the spine, wrist, and foot isn't just a disease. It's evidence of decades of repetition, endurance, and craftsmanship. Every bowl, every jar, every carefully turned vessel left a mark on his body, and that body, in turn, left a mark on history. Piecing together DNA, bones, teeth, and burial context, we gain one of the most complete portraits ever of an ordinary person from the Pyramid Age. He wasn't famous, he wasn't celebrated in the way pharaohs were, yet through science, he speaks across the millennia. We can see his hard work, his skill, his connections to the wider world, and even his appearance. He humanizes ancient Egypt, showing it wasn't only monumental architecture that shaped history, but also the sweat, talent, and lives of people like NUE-001. This insight reshapes how we understand early Egyptian society. The civilization's success was not built on isolation or the will of kings alone. It emerged through human resilience, skilled labor, and cross-cultural connections, all woven into the DNA and bones of individuals who lived through it. NUE-001 reminds us that history isn't just monuments and tombs, it's people, real and complex, shaping their world with hands, minds, and genes. Ancient versus modern Egyptians. The genome of NUE-001 provides a rare and vivid glimpse into the genetic landscape of early Old Kingdom Egypt. Comparing this ancient individual with later mummies, such as those studied in 2017 at Abu Sir el-Melek, highlights striking patterns. Those later mummies show strong affinities with populations in the Levant and Near East, along with only minor contributions from sub-Saharan Africa. NUE-001, living more than 4,500 years ago, already demonstrates a similar pattern. This suggests that Nile Valley populations maintained a consistent core ancestry over millennia, rooted in North Africa while influenced by neighboring regions. Modern Egyptians display some differences compared to these ancient populations. Sub-Saharan ancestry has increased by roughly 8 to 15% on average over time, reflecting centuries of movement along the Nile, trade, migration, and later historical events. These additions did not erase earlier genetic patterns, but layered on top of them, producing the complex genetic mosaic seen today. The Nile River acted as a natural highway, facilitating the flow of people, goods, and ideas between regions of Africa, the Mediterranean, and West Asia. The combination of local continuity and external influence created the vibrant, dynamic populations that built ancient Egypt and persisted into the present. This single, high-quality genome from the Old Kingdom is groundbreaking, but it represents only one individual from one site. Caution is necessary when interpreting population-wide trends. Each site, region, and period may reveal subtle differences in ancestry, reflecting varying degrees of contact with neighboring civilizations, local adaptations, or even social stratification. Expanding the dataset through additional genome sequencing across multiple sites will allow reconstruction of the full genetic history of Egypt, providing insights into population diversity, migration patterns, and the movement of cultural practices along the Nile. The findings underscore Egypt's identity as a crossroads civilization. Ancient Egyptians were not isolated. Exchanges with neighboring regions shaped culture, technology, and genetics from the earliest dynastic periods. Pottery styles, building techniques, early forms of writing and artistic motifs often mirror those found in the Eastern Fertile Crescent. Genetic evidence now confirms that these exchanges were not purely cultural. People themselves moved across regions, carrying both genes and knowledge. The roughly 20% contribution from West Asian populations in NUE 001's ancestry reflects early interaction with the Fertile Crescent, supporting archaeological evidence of trade and shared technological innovations. Despite these external influences, strong continuity with local North African populations is evident. NUE 001's ancestry reveals that early Old Kingdom populations were firmly rooted in the Nile Valley, carrying genetic signatures from ancient Neolithic North Africans. Over time, incremental changes layered on this foundation, reflecting interactions with other regions, climate shifts, trade networks, and historical events. These gradual shifts illustrate the dynamic interplay between continuity and change, showing how a civilization could maintain a stable core while remaining adaptable and connected to the wider world. The addition of sub-Saharan ancestry in later periods further illustrates the Nile's role as a corridor for movement. Trade, migration, and political developments enabled populations to interact more extensively, adding new genetic contributions without erasing the earlier foundation. This layered genetic history reflects the fluidity of human populations and challenges simplistic notions of pure or static populations. Instead, the story of Egypt shows a long-term process of mixing, movement, and integration, producing populations capable of sustaining complex societies and monumental achievements. These genetic insights also help us understand how culture and technology have changed over time. In a community that was biologically and culturally related to nearby areas, monumental architecture, administrative structures, and early writing came about. Interactions with Levantine and Near Eastern populations may have brought in new ideas, resources, or methods that sped up the rise of society and technology. But the strong North African base made sure that these new ideas were adapted to the local context, creating a civilization that was perfect for the Nile. NUE 001 is an important link between the earliest dynastic populations and both later ancient Egyptians and the people who live there now. The genome reflects the equilibrium of stability and transformation that defines Egypt's extensive history. Even if North Africa's continuity is strong, outside influences changed the course of society, showing that civilization's prosperity depended on being connected, adaptable, and resilient. This account makes it clear that genetic evidence adds to what we know from archaeology. DNA now backs up long-held ideas about commerce, migration, and cultural interchange, revealing that humans moved along with material culture. The Nile Valley was not a separate area of human activity. It was part of a network that connected Africa, the Mediterranean, and West Asia. NUE 001 is a physical link to this early interconnected world. It shows how people merged their local roots with outside influences to build one of history's greatest civilizations. The depiction will get clearer when more genomes are sequenced, showing variances between areas, groups, and times. Each new example will contribute to the picture, making it easier to grasp how people stayed the same, how cultures mixed, and what shaped ancient Egyptian society. NUE 001 is the initial piece of this puzzle. It represents the first step toward figuring out the genetic history of the Nile Valley and its place in the ancient world as a whole. A 4,500-year-old mummy just spilt its secrets. Scientists uncovered shocking DNA that rewrites Egypt's story and reveals unexpected connections across continents. This is history like never before, alive, human, and surprising. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to explore more incredible discoveries from the past.